Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the Invoice from Scratch. That's right, we're going to be creating a brand new invoice all from scratch. You're going to watch me write every single line of code, format every cell, and create every single named range. We have a whole lot to cover in this week's training, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me. As you see, we're starting off with an absolute blank sheet. I do just have a couple lists. I've got a customer list and I've got an item list. That is all I have. I've got sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, all blank. So we are going to start from the beginning because I want to show you exactly how I create these, all the mistakes I make, how to fix bugs when I run into them, how to format, how to set things up. Every part I want to share with you. I know you love these when I start from scratch, so I want to try and get to do a lot more. Of course, before we get started, I do create these videos each and every week for you, absolutely free through YouTube. I just hope you can subscribe if you want to get these videos. Make sure you click the subscribe down below and don't forget to click the notifications icon. I do create these free and I'm so happy to do so. If you would like, I do have 100 of these applications for you available in a zip file along with a library. So if you want to pick that up right now, it's just $37. So be sure I'll include the links down below if you like these workbooks and you want to get 100 of them. I've got $37 special going on right now. Also, if you do like creating invoices, I've got a brand new mentorship program where we're going to be creating an entire accounting application. One single component of that accounting application is an invoice that looks just like this. This is a much more complex invoice than we're going to be creating today, but I want to show you the potential and power of Excel. And as I take you through, I'm going to show you every part of an invoice like this, along with a complete accounting, and that means purchase orders, inventory items. We're going to cover dashboards, sharing and sync, and a ton of other features. That's going on in the mentorship where I take you week by week and we create an amazing application. And I want to teach you how to define, design, develop, and deploy your very own applications for passive and recurring income. So if the mentorship sounds like something for you, I'll include the links down below and I would love to have you. All right, let's close this out and get started. We've got a blank sheet. Sheet 1, that is what I want our invoice. So we're going to name that sheet. We're going to call that invoice sheet. I want that to be our main invoice sheet on sheet 1. Sheet 2, what I'd like to have that, I want to have that our invoice list. That's going to be a list of invoice, so we'll call that invoice list. Sheet 3, what I want to do is I want to track the individual items of each invoice. We need to track those in a separate table and database, so we're going to call that invoice item list, or invoice items should be fine for now. Invoice items, keep it small. Only thing we have is customer list and items. That's all we have. So we've got 3 sheets. And invoices, basically what I'd like to do is design this in front of you now. How do we go about designing this? Well, I always, as you know, if you're familiar with my videos, I'm going to keep the first 2 columns available for our code so we can hide those. So let's drop this down. We're going to be using a lot of formatting on this, and we'll just color that gray. That's going to signify that we want to use those and save them for code. So I think that's quite important. And next up, column C, I want to give this just a blue color. I want to make sure we're going to need that column, but I want it visible and blue. Up here, I want to create the name, give it a name, and we'll call this invoice. That's going to be larger field. Perhaps we're going to go to about 30, and I'm going to create a larger because I want something nice and large. So we'll up that to about, let's say, 22, and then we're going to make it italicized. And I also want to merge that maybe up to F. So we'll merge and center. This is going to grow. Here, I'd like to put the invoice number, at least the name and then the label for the invoice, and I want the invoice number to go right here, perhaps in H1. These are going to be blue. Let's put those in blue for now, and I'm going to go all the way down, give that just the light blue so we can start to form out our invoice. So basically what I would like to have is our customer. I want our customer information probably in E. Let's say we'll put the E2 customer right about here. I want to put the customer, and then what we'll do is we'll have a drop down list of customer in E3, something like that. Then maybe in row 7, what I'd like to do is I want to put the items in here. So we're going to have a drop down list of items. So let's put the items description of the invoice. So each item is going to have its own description. I want to put the quantity, how many, the cost, what is the cost? We'll put actually the price or cost either way, and then the total. So we're going to total it. That should be sufficient. And I don't want the database row. This is important, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. And this is going to be the item row, and I'll explain that later on too. I want to keep track of what row. When we select the item, I need to know what row it's on. So let's give those a border. Let's just give it a basic. I'm not going to create an amazing, beautiful thing because we're going to be focused a little bit more on functionality than we are beauty. Description is going to need to be a longer field. Quantity is going to be a smaller field. And this will be fine. This is fine. Okay. And let's see, what I want to do is I want to have a drop down list of customers, and then I want to put the address line 1 and address line 2 of the customers. So when we select a customer, and then I want to have a drop down list. And then down here I want to have the totals. So let's say in row 28, let's put in a subtotal here. Subtotal here. And then we'll put the subtotal, and then in case there's tax, so let's do tax, and we'll just set 10% or something like that. And then, of course, you can adjust it. And then I want to have the total here, the actual total here. So we can drop all this down a little bit. And the same thing with here. And then what I want to do is I'll have a merged field. So then here I'll do a message. So let's merge and center that left and top, and then make this, we'll say thank you for, you can do custom messages down here. Thank you for your business. And we want to make that a little bit larger. So we can go up and then italicize, something like that. All right, good. So now we're getting to form our invoice. I'm going to put an outline on our form, on our invoice. So we're going to do format the cells. I'm going to put a border around that. I'll choose, we're using a blue theme, so I'll choose like a blue like this. Just an outline like that. That should be sufficient for now. And I want to get rid of these grid lines because I really don't like the way they look, so we can get rid of those so we have a much cleaner looking invoice. But I'd like to put some dotted lines here. So I'll go down here to about right here. Then I'm going to format those cells. Sorry, it's off the screen there. But right click, format the cells. I go with a lighter blue, something not too, and then I'm going to use the dotted line, vertical dotted line. That's going to give us a nice look there. So now we just have to add the borders here. So I'm sorry, right click, I'm off the screen. Right click and format the cells. That's all I did, but it's off the screen a little bit. So you know what I did. And so let's give it a border here. So I'm giving it a top border. And I also want borders here and here. Format the cells. Again, sorry, right click, format the cells. Also the border, right click, format cells. And then I'm going to bring it up here. So I'm going to do also a left border and then a solid vertical border, and then maybe a dotted, let's do a dotted center border there. Okay, so you get to see, now we can right justify that. So you can see the invoice kind of come to life here. Get an idea of what's going to go customer. And I also want an invoice date. Let's put that here. Invoice date. And that's going to go in here. And I'm going to right justify these two so that they're on the right. And I'm going to left justify these two. That way the invoice date. So we'll put an invoice date 1/1. And then I'll format it the way I want with a short date. All right, so it's starting to come together, and we'll put an invoice now. But as you know, or as you will know, I need some more information. We need hidden informations here that's going to help us create this invoice. So the first thing I want to do is I want to know a customer row. Let's just call it customer row. So when we select a customer, I need to know what row they are in this database here. So that's going to be helpful. I also need to know the invoice row. When we select an invoice, I need to know the original row of the database coming from here. It's going to come from here, so that we need to know. We also need to know if it's a new invoice or not. So we'll put new invoice, and that's going to be true or false. We also want to know if it's loading, invoice load, true or false. Also on that, we can put false. That's going to help us. I'll explain that later on. And then I want the next invoice number. I want the next available invoice number. We're going to color all of these. Just give it a nice color so we can know, we understand that those are important for us and those are for the developers. You will hide these columns and nobody will see them, so that's okay, but we can keep them. All right, so now let's focus on our other sheets. I need an invoice list, a list of all the invoices. This is I'm going to keep this very, very basic for our purposes here. So let's call this invoice list. And then invoice number is going to be our first column. Date, we have a date for that. And customer, I want to put customer and then total. This is maybe, the total may not be so important, but it may be for you when you do accounting purposes, but for all we're going to do is just save it. Not too important. So let's just increase this, give it a little bit of formatting. Nothing too formal, nothing too fancy for our purposes today. Just trying to keep it simple. And I want to keep track of invoice items. So that's very important. I need to keep track of the individual items. So let's type in invoice items. We need that. And that's going to be a little bit bigger of a table. Invoice number. We need to know what invoice number each one is. I need to know the item name and the description. Now the description may be different than our saved description, meaning we need to save the invoice description. So that's very important. Also the quantity and the cost or the price. We can do price. And then what we want is invoice row. I need to know the row of the invoice that this was placed on. And I'll explain that a little bit later. And then the row. What I mean is, when we save an invoice item here, I need to know, is it row 11, 10, 9, 8? So I need to know the row it is so I can place it back. When I load the invoice, I can put it back in the right place. So that's important. All right, so we've got everything on that. Let's merge and center it and then grow that a little bit, bold it, and make it look a little bit better. And then also center these, add some borders around it, and then we'll just give it a color. Any color will be fine. All right, all right, so now we have invoice items and we have everything that we need. Let's center that. And let's just increase the columns. But also on invoice, on this particular one, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to need to be running an advanced filter. And what that does is, so let's say there's items from tons and tons of invoices. I want to get a result of only one specific invoice. I want all of the items for one specific invoice. So how do I do that? Well, I use an advanced filter based on an invoice number. So when we copy this, I'm going to run an advanced filter. I'll put it right here. And I'll call this criteria. And so what I want is I want a criteria based on the invoice number, whatever invoice number is here. So how do we do that? I'm just going to create a formula. It's going to say equals. What is it going to equal? Whatever the invoice number is right here. So when we do place an invoice here, it's automatically set as the criteria here. Okay, so we can center those, color those just so we can, let's give it a different color. So now we see the criteria, and also, so I want to run advanced filters. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here, and then I'm going to call this filter results. So these are going to be results of our filter. So only one specific invoice out of all the invoices, let's say 2, let's say we have tons of invoice 2, only the items with invoice 2 are going to display here. So I'm going to merge and center that and then make it a little larger so you can see it, and then give it just a color. Let's give it this color so we can differentiate between the results and every other color. All right, so we have our basics now down, so that's important. And let's say our invoice list, let's say we have 1, 2, 3. Our invoice numbers are going to go down like here. So we need to know those invoice numbers. That's very important. Now we need to do some named ranges. So let's create some named ranges. I need primarily 3 named ranges. I need an item list name, I need a customer list name, and then I need an invoice number named range. So let's create those 3. We're going to create dynamic named ranges using offset. So all we need to do is just highlight the selection. I'm going to include the header row because I don't want there an error if there's no data in here. So into the formulas name manager, and there's no name managers, I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to give it the name of invoice item name, which is fine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create offset, which is going to be dynamic offset, and we're going to start it out at A2, which is what I want. But of course A2 is the header, so I wouldn't want to include that. So we're going to move it 1 column down, then comma, comma, count A. And what are we going to count? We're going to count basically everything from here, let's say to 9999. All right, so just a large number of rows. Then, but of course I don't want to include the header, so I have to do -1, then comma 1 for a single column. Tab it over, double check. When we're tabbing it over, look, double check the dancing ants are correct. Good, so we're good on the item name. We've created an item name, tab it over once again. It looks proper. Let's create a brand new one. I want, for customers, I want to do the same exact thing. So name manager, new, let's do customer name, tab it over, do the same thing, offset formula, offset, starting out in A2, comma 1, comma, comma, count A. We're counting all the ones. Where are we counting? I'm going to count all the ones, and then again, we're going to do 9999, end parentheses, and then -1 because I want to subtract 1 because we're including the header, and I don't want to include the header, comma 1, and then tab out, tab back into it, and make sure that we've selected all the ones. Does that look right? Make sure it goes to the end. Yep, that is correct. Okay, so we have customer name and we have now item name, and so let's continue on. One more to create. Let's go into the invoice list, and I want to create invoice numbers. So name manager, again, new. You get the idea here. Invoice number, just create that. And again, same thing, offset. So we'll start out with offset. And what are we going to offset? A2 again. So we're going to do again, comma 1, comma, count A, same thing pretty much. Also going to highlight these, go to say 999, one more 9, and then -1, comma 1. Okay, so tab over it and make sure it includes all the data that we want. Good. Okay, great. So now we've got our 3 named ranges. So now we're ready to create a few formulas that are going to help us. So we can close that out. Let's save this. Always save our work because we created our work. Okay, back into the invoice. So first thing, I want the next invoice number. We notice we have 3 invoices. I'm going to erase those in a moment, but I've got 3 invoices. So the next available would be 4. So let's create a formula for that. Equals if error. Why if error? Because if there's no invoices, we need to make sure. Max, what is the max? The max of the invoice numbers, which is the named range we just created, +1, right? Our maximum is 3. Our next one would be 4, +1, comma, what if there's no invoices? If there's none, I want to start it off in 1. If there's an error, right, because there's no data, I want to start it off in 1. Right now it's 4, right, because our next one's 4. We did the max +1, but what if there's none? If there's none, we want it to revert to 1. Why would it be none? Why would there be an error? Because as soon as I delete that data, it's going to revert back to 1. That's exactly what I want. What about the customer row? Well, I need to create a row for that, and I want to create a drop-down list of the customers here. So we can do that with this just data validation pretty simply here. So into the data validation, list equals customer name. That's the named range we just created. Click OK and make sure that includes all of our customers. Great. So basically what I want to do is when I select a customer, I want to put the address 1 and the address 2 lines down here. But I need to know the customer row, right? Customers, keep in mind, they start off in row 3. So keep that in mind. So let's get that customer row through a formula, and we're going to place that formula right in B2. Equals, what does it equal? If error, in case there's an error. Match, we're going to use the match. What are we matching? We're looking up. What are we going to look up? I'm looking up E3. I can't click it. E3. And then comma, customer name. That's the range I'm looking it up. 0, I want an exact match. Then I want to add 2. Why are we adding 2? I'm adding 2 because our customers start off in row 3. So if we get a return of 1, that's going to be the first customer. I want it to actually return 3. So comma, why comma? If there's an error, just click empty. All right, great. So let's double check that. Our first one should be row 3, which is exactly right. That's exactly the way I want it. First one is in row 3. Our first customer here is in row 3. Perfect. Okay, great. And now we need the invoice row. I want to do pretty much the same thing, but the invoice row. If we look at, let's put some invoice numbers back in here. 1, 2, 3. So invoice number 1 is going to be row 3. Let's make sure we create a formula for that. So refer to this, it's going to be based on H1 equals if error. What is the value? We need to match again. Match. What are we matching this time? We're going to look up the invoice number and we're going to match it with the invoice number, and then we want an exact match. So it's going to be 0. Again, we want to add 2 because our first one starts in row 3. +2, comma, double quotes for if there's an error, and perfect. Now invoice 1 is row 1. When we change this to 2, it changes to 4. Perfect. That's exactly the way I want it. Now we've got all of this set up. What about our item names? I want a drop-down list of item names here. So I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to go into data validation, list, and I'm going to create item equals item_name. That is the name that we gave the item name. So good. Now we have a list of item names. Great. But what I want to do is I want to know what row this is on. We can increase this a little bit. Sure. What I want to know is what row is this? Again, we can do that with a formula. So let's do that. Equals, again, if error as always, in case there's an error. I want to match, use a match. And what is this match based on? It's based on D8. So D8. And what's the lookup array? It's going to be item name. Exact match. Again, also adding to 0 actually. Adding to again because I need to know the row, comma, and then in case there's an error. So great. The first one is on row 3 and row 4. Perfect. Now I'm going to copy that formula down. Copy. And I'm going to copy it all down here. This can be hidden if you like. Paste formulas. Okay, so now we have it. If there's now as soon as we select in any row an item, we have the row. We're going to need that because when I want to load the description, the quantity, and the price in a macro. All right, great. So our invoice is starting to form. Let's create some buttons. We want some buttons here. And that's going to help us so we can save the invoice. So let's do that right now. Let's save our work and insert. I'm going to insert a shape here. Let's just right here and let's format. I want to, let's say 0.27 and about 1.25. Okay, so that's about the right size here, and then I'm going to give it this color, maybe this color. Now I got some icons saved, and I want to create basically 4 buttons: save or update the invoice. I want to cancel new, I want to add new, and I want to print. So I want to give it 4 different buttons, and I want to add some icons. So let's insert some icons. I had some saved, so I can just copy these into them, and I want to size them all the same. So I'm going to do 0.2. That's the size I want to give them. 0.2. I want to give them all squares. And this one, actually, this one I want a little bit bigger. This is our invoice background. Actually, that's fine. I'm going to resize the others a little bit smaller. So I'm going to hold down the control, click on all 3 of these. Those are going to help us. And let's go to 0.18 or 0.16 for those, because I want them smaller. Okay, so our first one is going to be save update. Save, or actually let's update. And then I'm going to right justify that. Okay, and then I'm going to put this icon right up here. And then I'm going to bring that icon to the forward. I'm going to bring them all. So click on all 3 of them and then bring them to the front. So we're going to bring them to the front. Now they're all in the front. All right, that looks good. I'm going to group it, but let's duplicate this one. 1, 2, holding down the control D, 3. Okay, so that way we have 3 buttons, 3 more buttons, 4 in total. And I'm going to put this one, 2 are going to overlap. So I'm going to size these and all going to line those to the left. And then I'm going to distribute them vertically here so that they're all distributed. And this one is going to be add new, and this one's going to be cancel new. So add new and cancel new are not going to show up at the same time. Cancel new. So those 2 are going to all be same. So let me copy this. I want this icon for each of them. Add new. We can use that plus for this. And where'd that printer icon go? Here. That one needs to be brought to the front. Format. Bring to the front. Okay, and so this one I'm going to duplicate again, and I'm going to bring it here, and then the cancel new I want to bring here, because that's going to be, I'm going to bring that to the front too. So I want the cancel to be able to, users to be able to cancel to get out of that new, and so we can do that. Let's zoom in, kind of that'll help us work with them, and we'll create these buttons right here. Add new, and where'd that plus sign go? There it is. Bring that to the front. Format, align. Bring forward. Okay, so we'll have to realign those again. Now we have everything. Let's just bring it up and we'll start to group our buttons, and that way we have everything set so we can start creating macros and assigning them to that. Let's just align these once again now that I moved them. Align to the left and then distribute vertically. All right, great. So we have add new, and they're a little bit big, aren't they? Let's move them. Let's shrink them a little bit. Okay, so let's shrink them a little bit. Hold down the control and then shrink them all a little bit. Okay, that should be good. All right, so we have add new invoice. I think we can do invoice. Add new. That's fine. Add new. Save update. And this should be print. Print invoice. And we can also duplicate that and put that and bring the printer up in front, all the way to the front. Bring it to the front. Okay, so we're getting our buttons. Now we're going to name our buttons accordingly. And so we have specific different buttons for that. I don't know if we need that. Okay, that's good. That's okay. I think we've got everything just right. Okay, so I'm going to hold down the control, select all the icons within this button, and then I'm going to group them, and I'm going to give it a specific name. Save invoice button. It's really save update, but that's fine. Save. This one I'm going to give another, also holding down the control. I can also group them. I'm going to group them, and then we're going to call this add new button, and then cancel new button. Holding down the control, grouping them, cancel new button, and then the last one, print invoice button. Holding down the control on all of these, and then grouping them, print invoice button. Okay, so we have them all named, and basically add new and cancel aren't going to show up at the same time, so I want to make these pretty much overlap because they're not going to show up at the same time. All right, good. Now we've got our buttons and we've got them all named. That's going to help us. Zoomed in too far. Okay, so we've got everything. It looks really good. Now we have, so we're really ready to create some macros. Now why don't we get the address here and here on change of E3. When we make a change, we're ready to have that address automatically. And if we look at our customers, we see that address is located in B and C. So let's start out and let's get into our code. Developers, if you don't have the developers available, you can find that into the options. And just go into the customize ribbon and make sure you select developer here. Alt F11 is a shortcut that'll give you the individual. Basically, we have no macros, nothing else. We're going to create a module also. So we're going to insert a module and we'll just give it a name. You can click on the properties here and you can give it any kind of a name, whatever you want. Just call it invoice macros. The only thing you want to make sure of is that the name of your module is never the same as any of the macros. So we're going to create several macros. But first we want to create some actually macros on the sheet itself, right? And it's going to be based on a change. When we make a change to the customer, I want the customer address to show up. So worksheet and not selection change, that's when you make a specific selection. We want to focus on change, actual change. What are we changing? We are going to be changing it's E3, any change to E3. So that's what we're focused on. So let's do that. If not, intersection, that's called auto type. It automatically typed for me. I've used auto hotkey. You can look it up on Google, auto hotkey. That helps me. E3, on any change we want to do something. So what is we going to do? Well, we want to make sure there's a few things. We want to put in then, of course. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure it's not empty, and we want to make sure B2 is not empty. Why do we want to make sure? I want to make sure that this is not empty, right? Make sure, and I want to make sure that there's actually a customer row in B2. Those two things are important, so we can do those in another one, in another if. If target value does not equal empty and range B2 dot value does not equal empty, then we can proceed, right? Empty. Then we can move forward with adding it in. So first we're going to dim the customer row as long. I want to know the customer row. And we're going to set the customer row. Customer row equals B2, right? B2 is right here. Adding that in. Control C equals B2 and put a note customer row. Now that we have the customer row, we can put in the address line 1 and line 2. Where are we going to put it? We're going to put it right in E4 and E5. Those are the cells right below it. So range E4 dot value equals, where's our customers? Our customers are located on sheet 4 right here. So sheet 4 dot range B, right, our address, first address, our customer name is located in A, our addresses are located in B. So our first B and what? B and the customer row dot value. That would be the address 1. And next up, of course, E5, the cell below it, range. So we can just copy that and make changes very, very easily. Copy that. Go down, and that should be E5. E5 is address 2. Address 2 is located in column C, so we can do that change C and make that address 2. Let's double check into Excel here, And look at our customers, addresses B1, address 2, C. So now when we change it, when we change this, double click it, the address shows up automatically. Make a change again, it's going to show up. Great. Okay, so we have that. So now that's working. But what about when we, since we're making changes, what about when we make a change to items? We want the description, the quantity and price, and the total. Now I want this to appear, but I only want it to appear in certain conditions. When we load an invoice, when I bring an invoice that we've saved a long time ago, the description, the quantity, and the price is the one that we saved, not necessarily the one that's located in this item list. So keep that in mind. So when we load an invoice, load it means previously been saved, we want to differentiate between this kind of change, because there's one change where the user's actually entering it, and then there's another change where the invoice is loading. So we can use that through invoice load. So basically I only want the description, the quantity, and the price when we change this, but I only want it to load when the invoice is not loading. So we need to put in a caveat, another condition into our code. So this is going to be based on base changes D8 all the way through D27. So let's write some code in that. And we'll go ahead and backspace that. Now this is going to be on, let's notate, it's always good to notate, on customer name change. And this is going to be on invoice item name change. On invoice item name change. But not on invoice load. Very important there. If not, okay, what are we, again, our range we're focused on is, of course, D8 through D27. So that's what we're focused on, and making sure that B5 is false. So D8 through D27. D8 through D27 and range B5 equals false. We want to make sure that is B5 is false. Dot value equals false. So on those two conditions, let's add then. And all right, then what do we want to do? Then I want to load the invoice. Again, I want to make sure that we actually have a value, right? The only way we can load the invoice details, the only reason I need to get the item description, the default quantity, and the sales price, I need to know the row. That's very important. We need to know what row is in. That row is stored right here. So we have to make sure that C is not blank. So we can do that with the following lines of code. If range C and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty, then we can continue. Then we can continue. Then we can do whatever we want. So then we can add in the information. Then okay, so then we're going to dim the item row as long. Now the item row is going to, of course, be whatever's in C in the target row. So we can just copy that and put equals below it, before it, equals item row. And that's the item row, the original data row. So now that we have the item row, all we need to do is in E, F, and G, place whatever is located from here in B, C, and D. So we just make one line of code, we can do that. So it's basically range E and, of course, the target row, whichever row we're on, target row, and through, what is it, G and the target row, dot value equals, remember, E through G, let's go over that again, E through G equals the items, this would be sheet, B through D, so that's what we're going to add it on, equals, and then of course we're focused on sheet 5, which is our items, equals sheet 5 dot range B and the item row, and the item row, and parentheses colon G, and again the item row. It's going to copy all the item row dot value, copy over description, quantity, and price. So we're going to copy all that over, and that's of course on change of D8. So let's take a look at that and see how that works. And go back in the invoice and double click on here, enter it. All right, and double click here, enter it, and then enter 1 here. All right, great, so it works nice. Now we have the totals, but we need the total, okay? We need to make sure we add in a formula, so let's do that. Equals, what is the total? I want to make sure if the price does not equal empty, then what do I want to do? I want to multiply the quantity times the price. Quantity times the price. Otherwise, just empty. That means if there's, and we're going to format that, of course. Copy that, and we're going to paste the formula all the way down. Paste, and then paste the formula. All right, great. So let's format all of these, and I want to format all of these to currency. So we got our numbers. So into the home, we're going to format everything as a currency. All right, so now we've got it as a currency. Okay, good. So we've got a nice little, let's save it. And we also want to add the subtotal equals the sum. What is the sum? It would be all of these. So we've got the subtotal, and I want the tax equals, what is the tax? Let's just say it's 0.1, 10% times whatever the total is here. So we've got the tax, and we of course we equal the total equals the sum of both of those above. Now we've got the total. Now we're starting to build out our invoice. All right, nice. It's looking much better now. I like it. It's getting better. It's a little bit too big. Drop that down. Okay, don't like it bold. All right, so we've got everything, and let's add in another item here. So really what I want to do now is we've got the item, we've got the address, we can start building out our macros now. We also want to start to save it. I want to be able to save this invoice to the database so that we can bring it up. Basically, when I enter an invoice here, I want to load it up. So let's start out with that, because we've got a good looking invoice here, and we can increase this a little bit, make it look a little bit bigger. That's a bit too big. Okay, so we got invoice number, and it looks good. Increase this column a little bit. And this is a bit too big too. Okay, so we've got a nice looking invoice. Let's get into the macros and start building out. The first macro I want to do is I want to be able to save this. So what I'm going to do is really, essentially, I want to save the invoice number, the customer, the date, and of course, I want to save that all to here. Invoice number, date, customer, and then the total. I'm not sure the total, but we're just saving it for the fun of it. Okay, and then of course, I want to save all those items into our items list here. I want all those items to be saved here. So let's write a macro that we can do just that. So into our VBA here, let's clean this up a little bit so it looks better. We don't need all this space. We'll add a little bit more. We do need on change of invoice number. So we have, let's put a little bit of reminder in here for us. On change of invoice number, load the invoice. That's something we have to write, but we need to write the macros for that. All right, so the first macro is that I want to do is I want to save that invoice. So invoice save, sub invoice save. Actually, save update. So let's just write it. It's going to be the same. We're going to use the same macro regardless of whether we want to save it or update it. All we need to do is differentiate between the two, and I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to dimension some variables. So dimension the invoice row. I'll need to know the invoice row is long. I'll also need to know the invoice item row as long. And I also want the last item row as long. And the item row, we're going to do item. I need to know the item row. For adding new items, I need to know the last row so we can add more. That's important because we're adding all the items, invoice item. And we're going to primarily, of course, focus on with sheet 1. So let's, nice, sheet 1. Okay, so with sheet 1. And we want to do, the first thing we want to do is we need to determine if it's a new or existing invoice. Determine new or existing invoice, and we can do that with based on a cell B4 invoice. So we can do that if dot range B4. Remember, B4 is what we set as a new, true, or false. B4 equals true, then it's a new invoice. And if else, it's an existing. Else existing invoice. Okay, so we're going to do some things if it's new and some things if it's existing. If it's new, what I want to do is I want to get an invoice row. We need to assign the row. If it's brand new, we need to get a brand new row, and the row would be the first available row. We can clear these out. So in this case, our first available row is row 3. So we want to get that, and we can use the line of code and XL up on sheet 2, which is our invoice list. Let's bring this out a little bit, invoice list. So our invoice row is equal to sheet 2 dot range A999 dot end XL up dot row plus 1, actually plus 1. That's going to be the first available row. Remember, XLab is just going to get us the last row of the value, so when we add a row, it's the first available row after that. So we have our invoice row. That's the first available row. Also, what I want to do is I want to set H1 as our invoice number. Remember, H1 is where we put our invoice number. So that's very important. Right here into H1, that's our invoice number. So I want to put that. Where am I going to find it? I'm going to find it right here in B6. It's going to take the next invoice number, put it right here in H1. So we can do that right here. Dot range H1 dot value equals B6 equals dot range B6. And that's going to place our next available invoice number right in the right place. So that's going to add invoice number. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add it to sheet 2. I want to put that same invoice number in sheet 2 in column A. So sheet 2 dot range A, and what row? A in the invoice row, and the invoice row dot value equals, what is it? Also equals B6 dot range B6. So we know we've still got B6 right there. B6 is our next invoice number. Add, we only need to add invoice numbers for new invoices, right? If we're saving an existing invoice, if we're updating it, the invoice number is already there, so we don't need to save it again. Okay, numbers. So we need to do that. That's for the first, and also one more, and actually that's it. I think we're good to go. Else, but what if it's an existing invoice? If it's an existing invoice, our invoice row is already known. Where is it known? Our invoice row is already based on a formula right here. Based on B3, it's going to be there. So we just have to add it there if it's an existing, right? So invoice row equals dot range B3 dot value. That's going to be our existing invoice row. All right, great. So we're set up. Next up, all we need to do is add the remaining details to sheet 2. Sheet 2, columns B2 dot range. In B, what is B? That's the customer name. And where's our customer? That date, actually B2, I think is our date. Let's take a look. Dot value, B, and the invoice row dot value equals our date. And our date is located, let's just double check that to make sure we have everything right. Invoice list, date's gonna go in B, customer in C, and total in D. And date, of course, is going to come right from H2. So let's add that in the code. Equals dot range H2. That is the date. Okay. So we have the date of whatever the invoice is. And next up, we want to add the customer sheet. And we can just copy that over and add in an update. It's a little bit faster than typing it out. And that would be column C is where the customer is going to go. And column is E3. That's where the customer name is located, and that's the customer name. And the last thing is the total, so I want to add the total, and that's going to go in D, and our total is located in H30, I believe. Let's take a look at that. H30 is where our total is. I'm going to add that in too. All right, H30. That is our invoice total. So we've saved all the invoice basics, but now we have to save the invoice items. That's very important. So now let's add invoice, add or update, perhaps add or update invoice items. So what do I want to do with that? Basically, what I want to take is whatever items are here, not the total, just whatever items here, the item name, description, quantity, price, and I want to place them right in here in this table. But they might already be there, right? If we're saving or updating, this is for saving or updating. So how do we know? Well, what I want to do is I want to basically check this database row here. This is the row of the database. So if it's been saved, the row is going to be here. It's going to be here. If it's not, that means it hasn't been saved before. That's how we can easily add new items to existing invoices, and we just update the database, or we add a new row. And I'll explain that to you later, but basically this is our check. This column I, is going to let us know whether it's been saved before or not. If this is blank, which it is now, it has not been saved before. So that's going to help us. So we just need to run a check to see if I is blank. But I also want to know the last item row. That's going to be important. So we need the last item row. Because what I want to do is I want to run a loop from the first all the way to the last. So we need to get the last row, and we can do that with this line of code here. So the last item row equals dot range D, the last possible row would be 27, 27 dot end XLUP dot row, last invoice item row. So now we can run a loop, and we want to make sure that we should put a caveat, if the last item or row is less than 8, in case there's no item 8, then go to no items, just in case there's no last item row. What if there's no row here? What if there's no rows, the last would be less than 8. So we need to put that into check for that. Otherwise, we're going to run a loop from 8 to the last row. In this case, it's 11. So we can start that loop through our code. For item row equals 8 to the last item row, and then next item row. So that completes our loop. So what do we want in that loop? And again, I want to check if I is empty. I need to know whether to save it to an existing row or a new row. This will tell us if it's blank, I need to save it to a new row. So we're going to first check in I. We do that if dot range I and the item row dot value equals empty, then it's a new row, right? Then it's a new row. So if it's empty, then, or let's put not empty. It's an existing not. We can do that, and then we'll add not empty, then existing row. Okay, then, all right, else new row, and then end if. Okay, so we can write some code accordingly based on whether it's new or not. So all we need to do is get the invoice item. If it's an existing row, invoice item row, we've updated up here, we've dimensioned it up here, invoice item row equals I, right? If it's existing, it's not empty, it has a row. And we could say equals this right here. But what if it's new? Well, if it's new, I need to add it. So in that case, if it's new, I want to find the first available row. Equals, what sheet are we on? We're focused on the invoice item sheet 3. So it would be sheet 3 dot range A 9999 dot end XL up dot row plus 1. That'll be the first available row. So that's going to give us our first, so we know where to put that item. So then it's a new item. So now we have our invoice item row. Now I want to put the invoice item in there, the invoice number there. So if it's new, right, let's say it's new, then I want to at least put in the invoice number here. If it's existing, the invoice number is already there. So let's put that in only if it's new. So that's in column A. So let's do that. And remember, only if it's new. So sheet 3 dot range A and the invoice item row dot value equals, what is the invoice number? Well, the invoice number is located here. Invoice equals, and the item, it would be H1 dot range. H1 is our invoice, H1 dot value, and that's the invoice number. I also want to add this item row inside I, right? Remember, now we're adding it in, so I also want to put it right in here in I. So I want to make sure, because it's blank if it's new, so we want to put it in. So let's do that with this line of code. Dot range I, and what row are we on? We're on the item row. That's for the invoice. Equals, what does it equal? It equals the invoice item row. I know it's kind of confusing. Invoice item row. So basically, here I'll walk you through it. I want to put this, I'm going to be placing it right here, all the details right here. But I need to know it's on row 3, or I need to know it's on row 4, or I need to know it's on row 5. So I want to put that 3, 4, 5 right in here. And you'll see it once it's done. I'll walk you through it, but you'll see it. So I want to put that row right in here. And we only need to do that on new items, otherwise it's existing already. All right, so we've got, if it's a new item or an existing item, so now we're ready to add in the remaining details. And we can do that with this line of code. Sheet 3 dot range B, and what is it? The invoice item row, and colon through E, because that's the last one, equals, what does it equal? Value equals whatever's on sheet 1, right? Dot range, in this case D, and in this case it would be the item row, and what is that? It's also through G, right? All the way through G, colon through G, not F, G, and the item row. We need the and there, and the item row. So what that's going to do is going to copy over the description, quantity, and cost. So here we're going to add description, quantity, and price actually. So we can add all this. So basically all we're doing again is we're just saying B, in this case, B, actually not here, invoice items, B through E equals whatever's here, D through G. So basically we're just taking the information here and we're placing it on the row right here. Now we just need to add the invoice row and the row here. So we can do that with the next lines of code. Sheet 3 dot range F and the inventory item invoice row dot value equals, what does it equal? Well, it's going to equal the item row. I want to know the item row. I want to know, for example, if this is put on item row 8 or row 9 or row 10, I need to put those rows and I need to put them right here, 8, 9, or 10. I need to put them here. Next up, I want to put in G is the row. Well, actually, we can do that up here because it's only for new items. So let's do that here. Dot range G, because we only need to do that once, and the item row dot value equals, and then it's going to be open quotes equals row. It's a formula that's going to get us the row. Add row. Okay, so we've added the row number. We only need, so now we're done. We've added F, G all the way through G, F, everything we've added in all the way up to G. Great. So we can run that code. Let's run the code and see if we have any issues or any missed. Let's debug it and see if we missed it. Invoice item row E, we need a colon here, and invoice item row. Okay, that looks good. Let's rerun it, reset it. Okay, good. All right, let's take a look at it. All right, now we have our invoice number. That looks good. And center that and reshrink that. Bring this out a little bit so we can see the details. Quantity price, that's good. Invoice row, we didn't get the row. Let's get the row number in there. We need to get that, so that didn't work out. G, and the item row, we should be invoice item row, and it should be sheet 3. Sheet 3. Sheet 3, G, and this should, of course, be the invoice item row equals row. There we go. Now we got it. Now we messed up our invoice. So let's take a look in G, because that doesn't belong there. Okay, that's fine. It doesn't really belong there. See, we put row here. We don't need that. Let's just add this in. 10, 15, 20. That's kind of expensive. Okay, so we've got that. We don't need them there. So now we have the prices there. That looks good. We have that. We have that there. And we can add in manually now because the code's going to do that for us. Items, we're going to have the row here. So equals row. Just add those in. And the formula will take care of it from now on. But we have the rows. So you see 8 is going to be this item 9. These are based on the invoice rows, 8, 9, 10, and 11, which is what I want. 8, 9, 10, 11. Great. So now we've saved this invoice with it and we've all the details. Perfect. What do we do now? We need to load the invoice. I need to take, when I enter an invoice number, I need to load it up. And I need to also clear the invoice. I want to clear the invoice. So let's write some more macros so that we can do just that. All right, so invoice and save and update. Let's make sure. I want to add a few more things on that. This is not quite complete yet. A few more things. I want to update the button set, and I want to make sure that the invoice load is no longer false. So we want to make sure that the new invoice is no longer true. We just saved it, so we want to make sure that B4 goes to false. So let's update that. Dot range B4 dot value equals false. Invoice existing invoice. So let's just do set new invoice to false. And also the button sets, dot shapes. What is that? What are the button sets? I want to make sure that cancel new, this is only for new. Cancel a new button, that's only for new. So I want to make sure that's hidden. And I want to make sure that the one under it, in this case it's add new, is also displayed. So we want to do that with those two things. Shapes, cancel new button dot visible equals MSO false, and dot shapes add new button, I think it was add new, I think that's what it is, dot visible equals MSO true. I'll make sure that's true. So let's run that again. It's not going to duplicate. Okay, let's invoice item. Let's make sure that's spelled right. Run it again. Okay, good. Now let's take a look at our button sets. Add new is there. It's ready. Save and update. Now we can assign a macro to the save update. Assign macro, the only macro that we've created. Save and update. Great. So when we click this, it works just fine. So let's say we want to add a row. Look, there's four of them, but I want to add an item to this invoice. All I need to do is just select an item here from the drop-down list and click Save and Update. Now you see it's been assigned a row. Now we look in there. Now it's here. See how it is? Now we just added one row. So now we can load the invoice. And we can also clear the invoice. So let's write both of those macros, because when I add the new, I want to clear all the data here. I want to make sure not to clear these formulas, but I want to clear all this data, the customer data, the invoice number, and everything. So let's do that now. Let's write that macro, and we'll scroll down here and we'll write it new. So sub invoice new. And with sheet 1, what do I want to do? Well, I pretty much want to just clear the fields out. So how do we do that? We could just say with B4, the first thing I want to do with B4, I want to set that to true, set invoice to true, dot range, B4, that's our field that lets us know it equals true. Set invoice to true, set new invoice to true, new invoice to true. All right, what do I want to do next? I want to clear the contents of some field. Dot range, I want to clear the invoice number, that's H1. I want to clear the customer, that's E3. And I also want to clear the customer address, E4 and E5. E4 and E5, that's the customer address down below, so I want to clear that. I also want to clear the data. D, I think it starts in D8 and goes all the way to G, D8 through G, I think 27. And also want to clear the rows, I8 through I27. Let's double check that. I8 through I27. Let's take a look at that range. So we have everything right. We want to do the invoice, probably the date too. H2 should also be cleared out. H1, right? We want to clear out these. C, actually, no, these are formulas. D through G, correct? And all the way from 8 all the way to 27. And also I8 all the way through I27. I think that's right. And just the date. No, I think the date we're going to set to the current date. So let's do that. H2 would equal now. So let's do that in the next line of code. So dot clear, we want to clear that. Dot clear contents. Clear invoice field. And then set the date dot range. H2 is our date. H2, we'll set that to now. Equals now. That's going to set the current date. It depends on the format, date and time, or date, depending upon the format you set. All right, now I also want to update the shapes, right? Dot shapes. Basically, it's going to be these two shapes, except we're going to reverse it. These two shapes, right? So we can copy and paste them right in here. Cancel new, we want that visible, so MSC true, and we want the add new. We just click the add new, so we want that false. Okay, so that's good. That looks just about right. So let's run that and see if we run into any issues. Nope, it looks good. Let's take a look, make sure our formulas are still here. Our formulas are still here. We need those formulas. The current date, customers blank, invoice blank, cancel new, save or update. Good, those two buttons. Print invoice, that doesn't look good. I don't think I like that print sign. I'll bring it over here. Okay, so the print invoice, everything's there. Actually, it's kind of ugly. Get rid of that. Let's get rid of that print behind it, because it's hard to see, right? Better if we just have the print. Okay, and we'll increase that to, let's say, 0.2. 0.2, not 2. Okay, that's better. That kind of is better. All right, so we've cleared out the invoice. Everything looks pretty good. Let's color this, give it a nice color, because I don't really like the color, and make it bold. All right, so now we have that. Let's save all of our work. We've got the clear. So the next thing up is I want to load the invoice. What I want to do is I want to put the one in here, and I want to have that invoice load automatically. So let's write a macro to load the invoice. So not only do I have to load the details, but I have to load all the items. So let's do that. Sub invoice load. Okay, we need to define some items for sure. So what do we want to dimension here? So let's scroll down here. We're going to need lots of variables. In this case, of course, the invoice row we're going to need as long. The invoice item row as long. And then we're also going to need the last invoice item row. We're going to run an advanced filter, last invoice item row as long. Probably a few more too, such as I want the results row, result row as long. And then the last item result row as long. Because we're going to run an advanced filter, I need to run through those results. And so that's very important. With sheet 1, we're focused on primarily sheet 1, so we need to keep that focus there, working on that. And what are we going to do? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that B3 is not empty. If it's empty, then we can't do anything. Why B3? B3 is our customer row. If I enter an invoice, we're going to have, B3 is our invoice row. If we're going to enter the right invoice, we need to make sure that we have an invoice row. If we enter something that's incorrect, it's going to be blank. So we want to make sure that the first thing we want to do is make sure there's actually a row tied to the data, right? We need to, if we're going to load this, we need to make sure it's there. Okay, so we have that. Now let's continue on with the code. Invoice B3, check for that. Let's check for B3. If dot range B3 dot value equals empty, then message box boss. Please select a correct invoice number. Okay, exit sum. Let the user know that we need to make sure we get a correct invoice. All right, now that we've gone past that, we can define our invoice row is equal, what is it equal to? B3. So we can set that up, just copy that, and then go down and set it to equals. Wow, this is a long training. Equals B3, invoice row. Okay. So now that we set the invoice row, we're ready to go with that. We want to make sure we also set the invoice load to true. So let's do that because we're loading all the information. We need to differentiate between that. Dot range B5 equals true. Set invoice load to true. Okay, so we've got that. We've got the invoice row. And now what I want to do is I want to add in the date and the customer information. We know the invoice row, so all we need to do is take the date and put that inside here and take what else? Take the customer and place it right in E3. So we can do that with the following lines of code. Dot range H2 is going to be the date. We already have the invoice number because the user entered it. Equals sheet 2, that is our invoice list, dot range, and that would be B and the invoice row dot value, that's the date. What about the customer? Well, the customer is very, very similar, except that would be an E3, in this case E3 and equals C. Our customer is located in column C, customer, right? Customer right here in customer in C. So we have our customer name and our total. Our total is not going to load over because that's calculated automatically. We don't need to load it. It's only one way. We only save it. So really those two fields. That's all I need to do as far as the basic invoice. And now I'm ready to load the items, and that gets a little more complicated. So let's go with that. Load invoice items. So basically what I want to do is I want to use our advanced filter. I want to take it. We may have lots and lots. You see we have invoice number 2 here. And we saved 2 ones. So we'll go over that and I'll double check that to make sure it's accurate. But basically we have 2 different invoices. We may have many, many different invoices. So this is a formula based on H1 invoice. I want to run an advanced filter. I want to look at the last row, determine all the invoice items, and return only the invoice items that are invoice number 1 and put those results right here. Then I'm going to take those results, not the invoice number, but the item description, quantity, price, and I'm going to bring them back into the appropriate rows, and I want to put them right in here, just the way they were saved, but I want to bring them back. So that's what we're going to do within VBA. So let's get into that and do that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get the last results row. We want to check for the last invoice item row. So the last invoice item row equals sheet 3. Remember, that's our invoice items dot range, and we'll use A999 dot end XLF. If we're going to run an advanced filter, I need to know the last row, last item row. Now we are, if we just run a check, if the last inventory item row is less than 3, then go to, let's just say no items. Then we'll put that down here, no items, just in case, so we can skip a lot of that. All right, so assuming that there is data, we can move on. Now we can run our advanced filter. Sheet 3, we're running our advanced filter, dot range. What are we running? We're going to base it running on all of our data, and that's going to include A2 through all the way through G and what? The last invoice row and the last invoice item row dot advanced filter XL copy. We're copying it to another range and we're creating a criteria. Our criteria is quite simple. Criteria range. What is that criteria range? Well, that's really basically J2, and let me check that out because I don't remember what that is actually. Our criteria is located right here in I2 and I3. All we want to make sure, remember, make sure that the name is, the header name is the same here, I2 and I3. That is our criteria. So let's set that up. Criteria range colon equal to sheet 3 dot range I2 through I3. That's our criteria. Next up, we want to see the copy to range colon equals, what is it? Sheet 3. I'll double check it. 3 sheet range. What is the range that we're going to copy it over to? K2 all the way through Q2. K2 through Q2. So let's put that in right there. K2 through Q2. And that. And then what we want, unique colon equals, let's just put false on that, equals false. Okay, so let's just double check that name. It's a lot of code, so I want to make sure we got everything right. Sheet 3 A2G, the last advanced filter, copy the criteria range. Sheet 3 I2 I3, copy to range Q2 K2 through Q2, unique equals false. Looks right. All right, let's write in. We need to know the last results row. Now the results are going to come in, but I need to know the last results row. So last item result row equals sheet 3 dot range. We can use K 9999 dot end XLUp dot row. If the last item result row is less than 3, then it doesn't have any items. So then we just put in caveat there. Then what we can do is go to no items. No items. It's going to skip all that just in case, because we can't bring information to our invoice if it's got no items. All right, but assuming it's greater than 3, we can now run a loop. So we're going to use the results. For result row equals 3, starting at 3, that's our first row, to last item result row. So basically we're going to get our results in here. Going to get our results are going to come through here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a loop starting at 3 to whatever the last row is, and determining based on whatever the invoice row is. The first thing I want to do is get the row of the invoice. Then I know what row to put the item description and the price in. Getting this row, putting the item information into each row accordingly to whatever row that is. So that's what we're going to do inside the code right now. So we're going to run the loop to do that. And let's close the loop out. Next result row. So that's going to be the loop. So we're going to go through each item. The first thing, again, we need to know the invoice item row. What is the row of the invoice? Invoice item row equal to Q. That is equal to, what is it equal to? Let's take a look. We want to make sure we know the row where that's going to be located. It's located in P right here. So equals sheet 3 dot range P and the result row. So we know that dot value. That's the invoice row. It's very important so we know where to actually place that data on the invoice itself. So next up, we can now set our information. So dot range, which you want, of course, D, and the invoice and the and the invoice item row, and all the way through, what is it? All the way through G, and of course the invoice item row. That value, what does it equal? Well, it equals whatever's in sheet 3 in the row, equals sheet 3 dot range, and then what are we going to start it out at? We're going to start it out at item L all the way through price. So L through O, that's what I want to copy over to the invoice. I want to copy it through D through G. So we can do that. Equals L, and what row will be the result row, and result row, and colon, and I think it was O. I almost forgot. Let's just double check that. The last one here, correct. O, the price is the last one. So, and O, and the result row dot value. That would be copy over item, description, quantity, and price. Item, description, quantity, and price. Copy all of that over here. Item, description, quantity, and price. Bring it over into the invoice. Item, description, quantity, and price. Great. So we have that covered, and that's going to do that for each one of those. But there's one more thing I want to do. What I also want to do is in I want to put the database row. That's very important, right? We want to know the I. So let's put that right now in I and write some code for that. Dot range I and the invoice item row equals, what does it equal? Equals sheet 3 dot range. Well, let's take a look at the column. We're going to locate that right over in, it's actually Q. I want to put the row. So whatever's in Q, I want to bring that over so I know what row it is. So that's going to be Q, and the results row, and the result row dot value. Bring over item row. Okay, great. So now we brought over item row, and now we've got that. Good. So now we just need to do a little bit of cleanup work. We need to do the cancel new. We need to make sure when we load it, it's always going to be an existing. So let's just do all this. Copy this, because we want to set, it's for sure it's going to be an existing, and we want to copy those buttons. So let's just bring those down here. Set the new invoice to false because we just loaded it. Cancel new, and then end with. And of course we want the add new button. All right, let's see what kind of mess we get in when we load this. It's also a good idea to clear the invoice on load. So let's do that, except for the invoice number. So I'm going to copy this here, the invoice new. I'm just going to go down here and paste them in here. Make sure that we exclude the invoice number. We don't want to clear that out. The invoice number is very important, but we don't want to clear out all the fields before we actually load the invoice. That's going to be very helpful to make sure that everything gets cleared out before we load in the new information. So what I want to do is I want to copy this right here, and I want to add it to is. What do I want? I want to load that, but when do I want to load it? I want to load it when a user makes a change to H1. So let's write that in the code. Remember we had it. If not, right, H1, I want to load that in. So then, okay, then what do I want to do? I want to load it, but I don't want to, the important thing is we want to make absolutely sure that when we're loading it, that B3 contains a row. We can't load an invoice unless there's no row. So let's make sure that B3 contains a value first before we go about doing that. If range B3 dot value does not equal empty, then we can load it, and then I'm going to paste it in. Then we can load the invoice. Load invoice. Okay. So let's take a look and see how we got, see if there's any bugs or issues, and we'll fix them if we do. Okay, I loaded up, no buttons, perfect. So we see we loaded the invoice row, everything. So we can click add new, let's right click, assign the macro, invoice new, click OK. Add new, great, it clears everything out. Cancel new, we need to write code for that. Load it in, perfect. So we've loaded in, and that was working great. All right, so I want to create a cancel new. All I want to do is cancel new is this. It's very simple. I'm going to take whatever is here in our first and just put it in right here. It's going to default, assuming that it contains a value. So let's write. That's a very, very simple code. Sub invoice cancel. Oh, not there, not there, not there. We want to write that in our module here, right here. getting ahead of myself here. Okay, sub invoice cancel new. If sheet 2 is our invoice dot range A3, which is our first possible invoice number, dot value does not equal empty, then what I want to do, I want to take that value and put it in sheet 1 dot range H1 dot value. Basically, that's the invoice number. I want to put A3, whatever's here, I want to put it in, and I'll just explain that. Equals, and I'll explain that. So basically what I'm saying is if A3 is not empty here, if A3 is not empty, take that number, place it right in H1. So now we can do it. So when we click add new, right click, assign macro, and then when we just click OK, cancel new. So now we click cancel, and it's going to load the first invoice automatically. Add new, cancel new. Cool, we're making progress. One more macro to go, print invoice. So we've got save and update, we've got add new, and now we just need print. So let's get that done. That's really easy. Oh, well, let's set the print. Let's set this. I'm gonna take this and I'm highlighted this, and I want to set the print. So we can do that in the page layout, print area, set the print area. That's gonna set our print area. Let's preview and take a look at it. See, not too bad. It could use increasing in some columns, but you get the idea. You can increase it as you want, but as long as it's not missing any information, everything can encompass in. It's not the best, but probably it should work. Of course, you can increase this description. We have lots of space, lots of extra space to increase these columns a little bit if we like. So, but it looks pretty good. If we preview it, we'll see it. All right, so now we're done. Now we need to write the macro to print it. So let's go back into VBA and then sub invoice print. That's it. Okay, so sheet 1 dot print out. What are we printing out from? We want to print out the page as is. So comma, comma. Most of this can copies. If you want more than one copy, you can put it here. If you want to preview it, we're not going to preview it. Just put false here. And active printer, you can put in a specific printer. The active printer, you can leave it blank. That'll print to file. Collate, print to file name. Comma, comma, and then we'll ignore the print areas, and then false. I don't want to ignore the print areas. Okay, and that's pretty much it. That'll print it out. So now all we need to do is assign that macro to this button here. Right click, assign the macro, invoice print. Click OK. My default printer is Snagit, so we're going to print the invoice, and it's working. It's printing it to the default printer, and there it is. There is our invoice. Very, very cool. We got a nice printed invoice. And I just showed you in an hour and 15 minutes or so how to print, save, load invoices. Feel free to download this workbook. I'll include the links down below. You can get them free of charge. Just go ahead and check the links, and I'll make sure with your email or Facebook Messenger. If you like this, I'd appreciate if you subscribe. Please join our mentorship program. I've got so much more to show you, and I'd love to see you take your Excel skills and create a passive income stream with it. And I want to show you how to do that. Thanks so much for joining me on this week, and we'll see you next week.